Hey, this is Dimitris, the Curious Tanguero. My goal is to bring more people to tango and more tango to people. Today I'm sharing with you the second part of the interview with Oa Metzner. In this part of the interview, we discussed how the approach to teaching and learning tango has changed the last years. We discussed ways to improve your tango, which muscles can help you dance better, and we discussed common injuries and how to reduce pain during your dance. If you haven't followed the podcast yet, look for the follow button, and if you haven't joined the Curious Tanguero newsletter, please do. It's fun, it's free, you're going to learn many ways to improve your tango. Just go to thecurioustanguero.com. Now, let's dive into a world where the leaders give an input and the followers add to it, where four muscles can make a huge difference, and where complaints about lower back pain and other issues may be reduced.
For me, it's interesting that these kind of discussions they were not. I think, I assume, I
Hmm.
guess, they were not done in the past. I think that the way that we are teaching and we're learning tango has changed a lot over the years and keep changing, and hopefully it will continue changing and adapting and improving. And I want to ask you because you have a lot of experience in that topic. Have you noticed how the approach to learning and teaching tango have been changing over the years, and if you have identified, any positive or negatives in the way that is changing.
Oh, yes. I'll tell you a story. When I came to, not my first class, but I moved I first started in one place and then eventually I moved to another city where I tried three different schools. So one of these schools, I went to the first class there and I've probably had like no, maybe 10 classes in my life at that point. Um, and I came to to that class and it was actually a small group class. And what we were told, we were maybe like five couples in total. We were told, women, please go sit there. This is a bench. Enjoy yourselves. Just wait for the leaders. We will teach the leaders and then you can join them. So the five of us women just sat there for a good 20 minutes, just waiting while the teacher was explaining to the leaders what they need to do. And then I don't remember what was the topic. Let's say it was probably, I don't know, back ocho, whatever, you know. So it took some time for the leaders to figure out what is going on. And wait, hold on, something it just dropped. Can you still see me,
Yes, I can see you.
Dimitri?
Yes,
Ah,
I can see you.
something back to meeting. Okay, there you are. Um, so the approach was we need to teach men what they need to do, and then women come and join them, and then they will be danced. So I call it the women will be danced when the men know what they're doing. So obviously, needless to say, I never came back to that school again. But this is something that you would probably not encounter these days. I would hope so. Maybe there are still some schools that might teach in this way. There's certainly, maybe not so explicitly, but there are still approaches like that in some schools. And I'm sure it's also some people, even in more progressive parts of the world, even in London, I'm sure there's still some people who maybe not explicitly, but implicitly they think that way. Like, I need to teach the leader so that the leader can lead the follower. Mm, Luckily, the approach changed. So generally, also the way I think of it is we are not leader and follower, even though we have to use these terms. There's, at the moment, at least in English, we haven't found anything better. So I also use leader and follower, but I always give a caveat. It's not a leader who is doing the work and the follower who is being a pretty flower being danced. I think of you, leaders and followers, as two dancers. The leader is the dancer who suggests, who gives the impulse. The follower is the dancer who interprets and adds something of herself or himself into that conversation. It's two people coming together and you need both. You can't just have the leaders who are knowing what they're doing and the followers who are just following. So I think that's the fundamental shift that happened probably in the last 15 years. And it certainly is still happening. Sometimes the pendulum swings a little bit too much to the other side, but generally it's the trend where we are becoming much more integrated and much more active in integrating the follower side of the dance into the couple. So that's probably the biggest shift that I've noticed. And of course, that's on the positive side. Yeah, that's the general trend that I'm observing over the years. Then of course, there are fashions. So there are fashions of learning the, I don't know, milonguero style. Then there's a fashion of learning and studying salon, because the championship suddenly became very, very prominent. Everyone wants to do a championship. And now over the last maybe, what is it, 3, 4, post-pandemic, I would say, years, suddenly the scenario studying became a bit more mainstream, and more and more people are starting to tap into, I'm not talking about professionals, I'm talking about the social dancers, tapping into what is a scenario and what do you do with it? How do you eat it, And I think all of that is great. I am not an scenario dancer, but I've done some scenario classes. I've studied it because I find it very useful. So this richness that we now have in tango, which was not there before, where we take different approaches, different sides of not necessarily even the same thing. I've invited, when I worked some years ago, I used to organize events in London. I worked with different couples, but then one time I invited Maria Filali, who's a dear friend of mine, and her life partner, who is not a tango dancer at all. So he is a dance coach and choreographer, has nothing to do with tango. But I invited him as well to participate in the workshops and to teach people something that is very different. How do you interact with a person on a different layer? So it's nothing to do with tango, but everything has to do with interaction, with connection, with presenting yourself in the dance. And it can be tango, it can be ballet, it could be anything. So what I'm observing is this input from different walks of life, different styles of dancing, a lot of information coming in from, again, biomechanics, people who study, things like Pilates, like I do, very deeply, or gyrotonic is a big thing, or people who come from more athletic sides. There's a lot of that coming into dance and enriching it, and I think it's beautiful.
I think it's really nice that you mentioned the Pilates part, and I saw you're doing animal flow, if I saw correctly,
Yeah.
right? I started doing that too, and it's so fun. Like the feeling of movement, coordination, being on the floor, using all four like hands and
Yes.
feet at the same time. It's beautiful. I want to ask you actually,
Mm-hmm.
animal flow, Pilates, is that a path to tango or not, in your opinion? Maybe to what extent?
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say it's a path to tango. It's a path parallel to tango that enriches tango. So it's sort of, again, tying in with what we talked about before, how there's a lot of inputs and influences from outside of pure social tango that we used to have some years ago. Now it's so rich. It's like it's coming, the information is coming from all walks of life. And I think it's fascinating. It's just so exciting. I'm excited to be living nowadays, that's for sure. But would I call Pilates a path to tango? No, it's something that accompanies tango. That's also the way it was for me. I started doing Pilates because I wanted to support my tango. I wanted to figure out, again, with my long body, how do I coordinate myself so I can be a better dancer?
How tall are you?
I'm almost 174.
174. Okay, okay.
Yeah, so plus the 8 centimeter heel, and you can imagine. So yes, and I have a long and slim body, so with long limbs. And yes, I've always been muscular because of sports. Like I've done sports all my life, but still, there's muscle that is useful, that is functional, and then there's muscle that is completely unfunctional. So how do we make functional bodies? Again, bodies have to be functional, whether we want to be living our life in a, injury-free way, or we want to be dancing tango, or we want to be really good at certain sports. Like we need to have functional bodies. And that's what I think of animal flow. I think of Pilates. I think of gyrotonic. They are by themselves they're not the goal in themselves. They shouldn't be. We shouldn't use them. I mean, some people might do it, but because they just love it, they enjoy it. Great. But I think of Pilates in particular because I'm teaching Pilates. It's a path towards being better in other things, in other areas of life, being more integrated, being more coordinated, being more aware of ourselves. So things like Pilates and animal flow gyrotonic are there for coordination, awareness, and support, and not a goal in themselves that will then make our tango better.
The last, I don't know, maybe 2, 3 months, I was trying to understand myself a little bit better and understand what makes me happy. And the phrase that I ended up is, I like to move. Because I know when I feel comfortable moving, I feel happy. Might mean exercising, might mean dancing, might mean going for a walk with my son, with my wife. It might be to any, like, I enjoy being in front of a computer, writing books and stuff like that. But if I don't add movement in every day,
Yeah.
I just feel sad. I feel stuck. And for me, anything that has to do now with movement, understanding movement, creating the conditions for the body to move freely, it's extremely interesting. I'm going to Feldenkrais, I Franklin method, all this kind of approaches. Um, and my life, I think, is a lot happier recently. And I think one thing that happened is that because of all this movement outside tango, I started uh, developing some more muscles, and my body is starting to be more conditioned for movement.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask, in your approach, when it comes to muscles and body conditioning for tango, what is the importance? And if I can make it even more specific, if a social tango dancer wanted to just strengthen three muscles, just it's a limitation. I know it's not a real limitation, but if there were three muscles, okay, those three muscles, those three things I want to strengthen, which one would you recommend?
Oof. Okay, that is a big limitation, but okay, we can talk about it. So the first question was on the conditioning, right? What's
The importance of conditioning and muscle development.
Yes. Again, if you want to be, not you specifically, but if a dancer wants to be, let's say, eternal beginner who is very happy to just consume certain amount of things that tango has to offer, doesn't have the curiosity to go deep, you don't need to do much. You will be limited to a set of dancers that are going to be happy to dance with you for years to come. And you will also have those fresh beginners in the beginner phases until they grow out of that phase that you can dance with. But again, you will be limited. Does it mean that you can't just dance without working on yourself at all? Yeah, you can dance. It might be limited, but you can do that. If you are the dancer who is curious to grow and develop, not only to be dancing with better dancers, because people think we want to grow because we want to dance with better dancers. Not some people do, but it might not be the only goal. Like I want to grow and develop because I'm just simply curious. I'm enjoying it. So when I'm curious and I want to be understanding more, I want to be able to do more, I want to be able to express more. The conditioning is essential. And the conditioning doesn't mean that we have to go to the gym and pump iron and just be like really buffed. It doesn't also necessarily mean you have to go to Pilates, that you have to do whatever, Feldenkrais. Movement, what you said, what is the prerequisite for being more skilled is being able to move consciously. Now, conscious movement can come from different directions, right? But it requires, we can just move and be floppy about it and be completely unaware of what's going on in our bodies. Yes, we can do that, but it's probably going to cause some injuries. It's probably going to cause some issues along the line if you're completely unaware of what's going on in your body when you're moving. So the prerequisite for being a more skilled dancer over the time, it's the conditioning that requires you to be conscious about the way you're moving. It's the awareness that we bring into our body when we move. And then it can be anything. If you're being very conscious about the way you do yoga, Great, fantastic. If you're doing weightlifting, but you're really conscious about everything that's going on in your body when you're doing weightlifting, great, you're probably going to improve your tango. It's not the activity in itself, is how we do that activity. If you're very conscious, you're going for a run or you're going for a walk, right? You're going for a walk in the park. You can be completely switched off and you can think about like, oh, I didn't load the dishwasher and I need to iron my shirt. Oh, my bills need to be paid. You're obviously not going to be conscious about the way you move. But if you're actually in this walk, you pay attention. That's something that I personally quite like to do. Sometimes I'm going for a walk and I'm doing a lot of walks because of my dog. I actually take my brain power to a specific part of my body and thinking, how does my left calf move when I'm walking? What is my left calf doing versus my right calf? Even things like that. What's going on inside my foot? Can I notice the difference between my left foot and my right foot when I'm transferring the weight from one to B? How am I transferring the weight? Simple things like that can be very mind-opening. And I find it very exciting. Or like sometimes what I do is I find it's something that I recommend for anyone. When you're going for a walk, place your hands on your hip bones and just keep your hands there gently and notice what's going on inside your hips when you're walking. It's a marvel of natural, like it's genius thing that the fact that we humans can walk at all. It's incredible that we can walk, that we can stand upright and we can walk on 2 feet. And just to observe, like you don't necessarily need to know anatomy to be able to be fascinated by this. Just place your hands on your hips as you're walking and observe what's going on. And if you do that, let's say for 10 minutes, you will learn a lot. So it's this consciousness that we bring into our movement. That's what makes a huge difference when we're going back into tango. And you were asking about the 3 muscles. I can immediately think about 2.
If you want, we can make
Yeah.
a group of muscles because in some
Yeah.
parts of the body it's like a couple of those, they need to work together.
Yeah. So the 2 first ones one of them is a group, the other one is more specific muscle. The group number 1 that I believe is essential for pretty much anyone. And again, the taller people are, the more essential it is. So if somebody is really tall and especially lanky, like long and slim, that muscle group needs to be conditioned. Now, it's not just, conditioning means awareness plus work put into it so that the person has control of it, is the abdominals. It's these ones here. Now, abdominals is not just a 6-pack. We don't need 6-pack to be good dancers. But we need to have control over these muscles. And I'm not saying abdominal, I'm limiting it a little bit to abdominals because there are a few muscles there that it's not just the one that create the 6-pack. They're also the side ones, the deeper muscles inside. Generally, we need to have control over our core. Yeah, and core is not just the front, it's also the back. So what I would recommend is not necessarily working towards having a 6-pack, but is being able to control the movement of the center of the body, because it's very likely that somebody is going to have this movement in their body. If this is the center where the upper body and lower body connect, that I see a lot of this. When we want to move like this, we want to move in one integrated system rather than 2 floppy systems that somehow link somewhere. So that's number 1.
Sorry, you see during the movement, instead of the upper part of the body and the bottom part moving together, you see it start moving independently.
I see a lot of this.
And wobbling.
Yes, I see a lot of this. Especially in followers, because again, the follower is the one who responds. I often see if the impulse comes, let's say, from the leader from here, the impulse gets swallowed here, and then this comes later. So I observe a lot, and that's what I work a lot with my followers on, is how do you integrate when the impulse comes here so that the impulse goes through the body all the way down to the bottom and doesn't get lost here in the middle, So
sorry to just for the audience, for the people who are listening that in the podcast, You mean when the input is coming from the chest level, from the higher part, and then it's just the higher part, the upper body moves, and the lower part stays,
Yeah.
unfortunately, without moving. Okay.
Yeah, again, I don't think of connection being from the chest, like we talked about it. For me, connection is from the back. The chest just happens to be there. It's like I think of it heart to heart rather than chest to chest. Heart to heart makes it a little bit more personal. It's a human side versus the physical biomechanical connection is from the back. And that brings me to the second muscle that I think is essential for leaders and followers. I use it a lot, whether I'm leading or following. It's something that when I discovered this for myself, changed everything, is the lats. Yes, these muscles here in the back, the lat is connecting the arm with the lower part of the spine. It's a big muscle in our back. And if the lat is not active, if, let's say, the leader or the follower doesn't know how to use them, again, lat is part of our core. That's why I say core is more, the muscle is not its muscle group. The muscle group is the core. But then I'm subdividing them into abdominals and the lats. So lat is the one that creates the volume in our embrace. And it's the one that if this is my hand and this is the leader's hand, the leader, if he pushes from the hand, I will be disconnected. If he sends the impulse from the center, from the core, which is the impulse coming again from the floor into his core, into the embrace, and then it's much more connected than if he just does it from here. And in order to make that connection, the leader needs to engage the lats. Doesn't mean that he needs to be like this, like he doesn't need to be, or she, we don't need to be super engaged. We don't need to be like super toned with super defined muscles, but the muscles need to be alive. They need to be living, breathing. They need to be active. So that's the number 2. And number 3, I would say, is hip flexor. So hip flexor is, and I will probably have to stand up for this, is the muscle that is here. So it's the muscle that allows my leg to be flexed. And oftentimes I notice that many people are not aware of that little muscle. And it's something that is that I'm using a lot when I dance. I'm thinking about it. I'm organizing my body so I can engage my hip flexor, stretch my hip flexor, and that's what gives me my projections, for example. Can I add one more?
Yes, you can.
One more, which is very, very important, is all the joints and musculature inside the foot. So that is another one. We want to be able to articulate our foot. So there's, again, sense of awareness and sense of skill in moving all of the foot rather than just flopping into our foot. So that's the 4th one.
Pushing ourselves to the next position instead of just falling
Yeah,
back.
exactly.
It was fun because I was about to ask you, I was like, you mentioned all those and nothing about the ankle. What's happening down there? You said
For me,
everything
it's not
starts from
about,
there.
yeah, it's not even about the ankle. Like, I think if we organize it's about the alignment. I think a lot about how do we build the body from down upwards and which part of the body needs to sit on top of what. Once that is organized, I don't even think of ankles, knees, hips in particular. I'm just thinking, how do I organize them so that they are in a coherent system with one another? But yes, the foot, it's more the foot rather than ankle that is important. Like we want to be able to do this. Yeah, like that is important.
I like that you mentioned the alignment part because it's so interesting how when our bones, our spine, everything's like well aligned, we don't actually
Yeah.
need so much of the muscles. It's like there's a whole structure underneath that's like it's doing the work kind of
Yeah.
on its own. And then, okay, of course, muscles and joints and all the fascia and everything is like stabilizes the movement. But I think this can protect a lot of people from injuries, from pain, and we have a lot of that in tango, which is kind of funny to notice because tango is not like very aggressive dance that you jump up and down, but yet a lot of people complain about lower back pain. We have like a random injuries. Maybe it's because of repetition of many times the wrong movement. But I think injuries and pain are unfortunately part of many dancers' journey in tango.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, what are the most common complaints that you have come across during your teaching, during your tango, and what are your recommendations to your students in these cases?
A good question. There are, I would say there's three types of complaints. One, the most common one, lower back. That is the number one thing. And again, as somebody, I have a very serious lower back injury myself, not because of tango, because of weightlifting and because of my dog. And it's possible to have absolute freedom of movement, even with very serious injuries in our lower back. But I think it's a shame when people without injuries, without any issues, create issues for themselves just from dancing in a not very optimized way. And that's what I see a lot. I observe people doing that, and like every time I see this, the specific things that people are doing with their bodies when they're misaligned, when they're not aware of what they're doing and they don't care about fixing that. I'm like, you are heading down the road towards real lower back issues. I don't want to look at that. Oh my God. It pains me to see that people are doing this to themselves. Number one thing is the lower back. And again, most of it is coming from not aligning the body. This is what we talked about. That is one of the fundamental things. Then one of the issues and fixes for that is, again, thinking biomechanically. I tell my students, do not think about connection in the dance as we dance chest to chest. The connection is not happening because you are connecting chest to chest with your partner. If you think about chest to chest, what will happen? I will move my camera. We will do this, right? And if I look at it from the side, this, and
We
we see a
will
lot of
we will push and open our chest forward.
Yeah, we're pushing our chest forward. Then the elbows go back, typically, right? And then if from sitting straight to going forward with my chest towards my partner, what am I going to do with my back? I've just created tension in my back. Now multiply that by hours of dancing over the years, and not just standing straight, right? We are moving, we are creating these rotations. I mean, sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's slow, sometimes it's small, sometimes it's big movements. So multiply all of that by each other, and you're getting your poor back, mostly in the lower back, that is just screaming for some help. So that's the number one thing. And the fix is learn the correct alignment. Do not think of your dance as being chest to chest where you come together and the legs go out, because this is not what we want. Yeah, we want to be able to connect kind of like that, where we create the container inside, but we're using the skeleton and the muscles in our body in an integrated way. And we're not trying to connect chest to chest because we want to be with each other. We will be with each other anyway. Number two, I would say, again, stems from this misalignment is the shoulder area. So something like this, where we're trying to get towards the other person. We're trying to be with the other person a bit too much. And then something like this, or the head goes forward. It's because we have this misconception that we need to connect as much as possible. And in order to connect as much as possible, we need to go as much as possible physically towards each other. And then I see people doing this, like they are literally going towards the other person with everything they have. And that usually has the opposite effect. It actually disconnects us. It doesn't allow us to be in our optimal position, where we are feeling connected, where we're feeling freedom of movement, and where we're feeling safe. So I taught my fix for that is learn to integrate the body into one system so that, this doesn't happen. Yeah. Like the floppiness doesn't happen. And second, I teach my students to think of connection this way. It's one individual who is integrated and desiring to connect to the other meets another one who is integrated and desiring to connect to the other person. And they come together. We are not merging and trying to dissolve into one organism. We are coming as two separate systems that really want to be together in that moment. So we don't lose integrity of our own body for the sake of being with the other person. And that's also the same thing in life. We don't want to disintegrate ourselves so we can be one with the other. We are coming as a complete person with everything that we are, that we worked on, that we integrated, that we've developed. And that integrated being meets another integrated being, and you go together and you will develop and you will be able to produce much better results together. You will be able to be much more respectful of each other and free to express when you don't try to merge and to lose ourselves in that embrace.
So we have you said 3 types of complaints. Was the lower back, shoulder?
Lower back, upper body, like often shoulders. The third one is plantar fasciitis. It's more common in women, I think. Now, I'm not a doctor, so that's something that is probably more towards the doctor work. But it often has to do with wearing shoes that are not necessarily very well fitted to the foot, A. And B, it's oftentimes is when people just, again, flop the foot instead of learning to articulate. When we do not have the strength in the muscles, in the joints of our foot, and we just use the whole foot as one, it's too much strain. It creates tensions that we don't want. So my recommendation now, I can't fix plantar fasciitis when people come to me with that issue. I say, listen, there's doctors, they will probably be able to give you better advice than I will. But my advice to everyone, in order to avoid and prevent issues in the foot, you need to learn to articulate. You need to learn to release the tension in the muscles, and A, and B, you need to learn to not have tension in the foot in the first place. And again, that is learning how to articulate with comfort, with confidence, without engaging the muscles until they are starting to cramp. There should be no cramping in feet.
Absolutely. And actually, I need to ask you about that, about the shoes and the not necessarily
About
good feet, about the shoes.
Uh-huh.
Why do we have high heels in tango? How do
Oh,
they help?
how do we get there?
And how do they help if they help?
Originally, the shoes were, people would wear whatever they had. It was, whether you have slight heel on, whether you're in flats. I mean, originally women would be in flat, in slight heel. Yeah, that's the fashion of the 20th century. When the actual heel was developed for tango, people say that changed the way tango was danced. I find heel to be reasonably useful, but not necessary. I do use the heel a lot when I'm standing, when I'm dancing. So I'm never on my tiptoes, and I don't like the idea of being on the tiptoes. Oh, wait, hold on. Let me just record. Forgot about it. So I do not, I never dance on my tiptoes, whether I'm in heels or in flat shoes. I always go down. Again, it has to do with the articulation of the foot because I want to be using my whole foot. I use the heel a lot. Any moment that I don't have to pivot, I'm trying to use the heel, which means that I only lift the heel off and I want to be on my metatarsal in the moment of the pivot. All the other time, pretty much, I'm having my whole foot down, which brings me to the point of thinking I don't actually need to have the heel. It looks prettier, and it distributes the weight a little bit differently, but it's not necessary. It's it's pretty.
I guess maybe sometimes it simplifies for some, like if I understand correctly, if you have a good understanding of how your feet need to articulate, you can dance with heels and you can dance without heels.
Yes.
But if you don't, for some people, it might help them because it forces them maybe to put a little bit of weight on the back. Or maybe no, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about
Yeah.
that. I was always curious, like,
Yeah.
it's hard. So there must be like a very clear reason that we're doing it. Yeah, it
Yes.
looks pretty. Is that the reason? Maybe it is. I don't know. But
I
I was
think,
like,
yeah, I think it's a very good question. I think your observation is correct. Many people, because they don't really articulate the foot enough. I mean, let's say women who are wearing heels, because they don't articulate the foot enough, they will be on their tiptoe. So having the heel there sometimes when they still have a sense of being on the tiptoe, but they can place the heel down and touch the ground. That sort of helps really. But if one knows how to articulate the foot, we don't need the heel. It's there to support, basically. So it's there to give a little bit of support when we don't want to be on our tiptoes all the time.
I hope that was useful. Keep an eye for the third part of the interview, and for the first, if you haven't heard it yet, we're going to cover resistance, density, lightness, and heaviness in tango. We'll also cover how Oa would start again if she was starting today from zero. And we'll also dive deeper into the role of processed emotional baggage in our dance. Finally, we closed by touching a bit on the importance of alignment and feet articulation and the difference between leading and following from the outskirts of the body versus leading from the core. Make sure to connect with Oa on social media. There should be some links available around this content. And if any of the topics that we discussed were interesting for you, feel free to get in touch with her, get an online class, get a private class, whatever you feel more comfortable. For more free tips, join the Curious Tanguero newsletter. Come on! And if you want to support the podcast, you can go to Amazon and buy any and as many of my books as you like for you, your friends, your family. Most people know me from my book Tangofulness, which is available in 12 languages, but you can also enjoy the novel When the Embrace Whispers, also available in many languages. The collection of tango advice, tango tips by the maestros, again, 250 pages, many languages. Or the book How to Dance More in Milongas for followers, which is the result of a questionnaire that I sent to over 16,000 social tango dancers. They're all on Amazon. Links to them should be somewhere around this content. Hugs and stay curious.